doesn't think about those things. He just cares about the car. I did not share. Okay, there we go. All right, so I added this in for kicks, other than I need to update my computer at home, obviously. That yesterday, as I said, I was working on stuff. You can see the tab is open here. And I noticed that the Google search engine yesterday was the Met. That's because it was 151st anniversary yesterday of the Met. So it was Google Art. And I thought it was cool, so I thought I'd share it. So I didn't know if anyone else noticed or not. This is, of course, more of a French style portrait painting that was done around the era after the French Revolution. This, of course, a Greek pottery. This, I don't know. This is a guitar, I don't know. Egyptian cycladic. These two, I don't know. And when you click on it, it doesn't tell you, so that was frustrating. But yeah, I was like, man, I want to be able to click on it and just, no. Come on, Google. You didn't make that one right, Google. It just takes you to the main homepage of the when you click on it. And I'm like, I don't have time to sift through all of this.
That's the whole thing. Now you have to sit here to
I know. Find it. I don't have time today. But yeah. Thought I'd share that because it doesn't happen all the time. It happens sometimes, but not always. Oh, twice in one day to talk about Romanesque art, man. I hate Romanesque art.
But at least you're going to get done with all in one day.
Yeah, I am getting it all done within one day, which is nice. Well, funny enough, I used to really hate Gothic art, but now I appreciate it because of Romanesque art.
Gothic art is cool.
Yeah. I'm not into architecture, so that's why. I just don't like architecture. It's not my thing. Yeah. It's also why my mother is coming with me on house hunting, because I don't like architecture. I don't care about those things. I'm like, I just want a house. I'm more of like the decor inside person and don't care about the structure itself. She cares about the structure, so she's coming. But yeah, that kind of applies to as I was going through these chapters too. I don't like architecture because it's all about the structure. And I find it very boring. That's just me though. Other people really find it interesting. I kind of mentioned yesterday, there is a lot of vocab. There's more with Gothic architecture than this one, but there is still quite a bit with this one as well. Yeah, have fun with that. So the term Romanesque derives from, well, an art style rather than politics or geography. Some of the other art styles that we've been focusing on more recently have to do with geography or, well, who was in charge, like Carolinian style was, or Ottonian. Now we're back to naming stuff after art styles. Gothic art is not like that. So this is legit the only one we're going to be talking about the rest of this time that is based on art for a while. It does occur roughly from 1050 to 1200. That is very roughly because in between that time, Gothic architecture starts popping up in France. That is a very rough estimate there. And most of the reason why Romanesque architecture does become popular is because of a switch from feudalism to city life. So back in the olden days, when we're talking about Ottonians and Carolinians and medieval times, the last couple of days, they lived under something called a feudalism system, a feudal system, in which the Lord was gracious enough to give his serfs land, and in return they gave him some of what they grew or some money, and they had to serve in his army if he ever needed it. But you get some land. Congrats. That changes. Feudalism ends and people are, well, not living under lords anymore. They're granted land in cities, and of course that leads to a demand of churches for the masses, which is how Romanesque starts. a need for large churches. This period of time is also marked with pilgrimages. Ooh, pilgrimages. I actually like pilgrimages. Well, I've never been on one. I don't want to go on one actually, but I find it fascinating. That's why I like it. It's this idea that if you are a sinful person, if you go to all of these holy sites and visit these holy objects known as relics, you can clear your sin. The more you sin, the further you have to walk. The less you sin, the closer you can go. This was kind of like the way to do things for the poorer people. Richer people could just pay alms to the church and donate money to them, which also leads to really big churches being built because there's a lot of money being donated because people sin. We're people. So yeah, these pilgrimages were quite dangerous. There were later on sites set up along the way to house soldiers to protect them on the roads. The pilgrimages sometimes would last a year. Yeah, a year. You would be gone from your house for a year to go from holy site to holy site. The most popular site of all was, of course, Jerusalem and Bethlehem. We talked about that the other day, but those are really far away. So for people in Europe that can't quite leave Europe, the popular destination was Santiago de Compostela, located in Spain. Also very far away if you live in England. Go across the English Channel and then like, yeah. But because of that, there were like stops along the way that functioned kind of as hotels, monasteries. And in those monasteries were more churches with more relics. So it was a big like tour that you would go on from church to church to church to see all of the relics, and then you'd get to go back home and your sins would be forgiven. It's a very fascinating concept to me, like I said. Romanesque art can be divided by region, and that's how we're going to be looking at it today. Is by particular regions that it popped up in, as they do vary from region to region slightly. Same with Gothic tomorrow. It's going to vary region to region. But yeah, I thought I'd include a little map of the basic pilgrimage road to Santiago de Compostela. This, of course, just includes France. I didn't include the England part because you couldn't really read it. It got too blurry. But of course, you would stop at other churches along the way, such as Chartres Cathedral or Saint Denis. You'd stop in Orleans, Tours, Bordeaux, all the way down to Lyon and Santiago de Compostela, or you could start over in Auden or Vézelay and go through, but you get it. All of these little dots represent different churches that had their own relics. It was legit a tour, very long tour. The weird thing, okay, this is a side note, for these pilgrimages, when you get to these sites, you would get down on the ground and like pray your way up to the stairs. Yeah, laying. You prostrate yourself before the church. Very weird. Maybe not weird. I don't know. Strange to me. I don't do that. But yes, they were very, very concerned at this period of time about making it into heaven. There's various reasons. We'll be talking about those reasons as we continue on. But we are starting with Romanesque in France and northern Spain, which was included in that map there. As you noticed, there are a whole lot of churches along that map. We're not going to talk about all of them. We are going to focus on some of the big ones, though. So here is Saint Etienne's Church in France, the interior of it, just to give you an idea of a very basic Romanesque church. As mentioned yesterday, wooden roofs were the norm. That continues on into the Romanesque era. That will switch in the middle of the Romanesque time period, though, as they figure out how to make stone roofs. But it was kind of a must figure out how to do it, as fires were quite common from candles, since it was like your main light source. This does have 3 stories. Your first story is your nave and your aisles with your arcade. This one does not have columns. It has piers. Sometimes there would be columns. That's why I'm kind of mentioning that. Your second story is your gallery with alternating piers and columns, and your third story is your clear story. Of course, at the front is the altar. Now, later on, as pilgrimages and collecting relics becomes really popular, they have to add on to the altar area and choir area. I might just draw this on the board. It's a little bit easier, even though the screen can't see it. Oh well, everyone knows that. So we still have our lovely little basilica format that we started off with at the very beginning of ancient Rome. We have our door, that's a newer concept, the nave, aisles, and then back here you have your altar and choir. Yes, they did have legit choirs of singing people. They were behind the altar. Later on, when pilgrimages are popular and these churches are collecting relics, these pilgrims are showing up in the middle of like church to see the relics and disturbing services. So they create ambulatories to house the relics. That's pretty much what an ambulatory looks like. So they could go down the aisles along the side and enter into the ambulatories, look at the relics without disturbing the services. That became normal. Later on, transepts were also added. A transept started off being in the center here. Later on, it will move slowly north to make it look a little bit more like a cross. Sometimes churches will have multiple transepts. It just depends on how many relics they have, as the transepts also held relics. Now, relic items would be things that supposedly belonged to saints or famous biblical figures, such as like bones of Saint Foy. We're going to look at that in a second. Or some of the hairs from the Virgin Mary's head, or her mantle. Now, is there a way to prove that those were actually belonging to them? No. But the churches claimed it, and they were able to get certificates of authenticity to set next to the relics. Of course, yes. Some of you are gathering, those certificates might not be real either. But yeah, the main reason why people would go on these pilgrimages, of course, sin. Other reasons why people would go on pilgrimages would be for like healing. If you were very ill, you would want to go and be near these blessed objects to try and like heal yourself from them. Of course, a lot of those guys end up dying on the way because it's a long trip. Yeah, different reasons for different people. But thousands and thousands of people do flock to these regions. A lot of times these areas would have like a monastery for people to eat at and sleep at as well for these pilgrimage tours. But yeah, this is your basic Romanesque church here. Quite plain. And I didn't need to draw that. Oh well, just means we don't really have to talk about that. I forgot that I included that. Well, now you see, I didn't do too bad of a job other than the one that we looked at a second ago doesn't have a transept, but now you know what it looks like with a transept too. And this is an aerial view of a different church. This is Toulouse, also located in France. This one does have a transept. This tower here was added on during the Gothic era, which is why it looks very different architecturally. So not Romanesque. Toulouse did opt for stone roofs instead of wooden roofs, as it helped prevent fires. We'll be talking about it at church today, but it's burnt down a few times because of this roof. But yeah. It was a very important stop along the pilgrimage route to Santiago de Compostela. It obviously includes a transept as well as radiating chapels around to house those relics in the ambulatory, as well as other galleries located along the transept to house more relics. The more relic items your church held, the more pilgrims it would draw, meaning the more money, as people would often donate funds as they visited. And then you could buy more relics and more money and more, and that's how it happens. An investment, guys. Oh, by the way, I mentioned yesterday my art history professor when I took survey one. Yeah, her favorite section was Romanesque. Favorite. I to this day don't understand why, but it's her favorite, and I actually know a lot of it because of her. So yeah, I might mention some stuff today. There's two objects in particular that were her all-time favorites, and I'll probably point them out as we go. I think it's just because she's seen them, probably, most likely. Okay, inside of Toulouse, it's a little bit more ornate than the previous Romanesque church that we looked at. There's actually decoration on the barrel vaults, which is exactly what this is up here. This is called a barrel vault, which is made using the round Roman arch. Kind of creates a barrel shape, which is why it's called a barrel vault. And that is what the original stone ceilings look like in churches when they are first incorporated. Barrel vaults do help hold up the roof. However, they don't allow you to get extraordinarily high. I know it looks super high. I mean, it is super high, but the Gothic churches are going to be way higher because they're going to tweak the barrel vault and make it more structurally sound. It does have engaged columns with alternating piers in between. And of course, some reliefs, both mosaic and on the capitals of the columns. This one does not have a clear story. It just has your first story with the nave and aisles and your second story gallery. I know so many vocabulary words now. So many. They all make sense in my brain. As I was reading chapters, they did not make sense. So I had to read some of them a few times because I was like, I don't grasp this. I'm a visual person, so when I read things, I am reading it, but it's not sticking. It's probably why I'm into art, because I'm a visual learner. But yeah, so you guys are getting the easier version, I feel like, as I'm looking at pictures with you and pointing stuff out. Here's another, I try to include plans of almost all the churches because once again, I'm a visual learner. And I need it. So you can see the distinct cross shape here that churches end up evolving into. In Europe, you have your nave, your aisles. This one does have two aisles. So over here you have your aisle to the side, and there would be another arch leading into a second aisle. Once again, just allowing room for all of those pilgrims to go through quietly without disturbing people. Then you have these squares on each side that make up the transept that have more side chapels and galleries housing relics. Your ambulatory with also more side chapels housing relics behind the choir itself and the altar. So, yeah. And if you're wondering what the narthex is, that's an entrance. In case you're curious. There were sculptures on a lot of these churches. I think this one's so interesting to look at. What do you guys think of the first time you see it? Like, what comes to your mind when you see this? Because it's not Christ.
It reminds me of Buddha.
It reminds me of Buddha, yeah. I'm glad it's not me. Like, your book does not mention that fact at all. But the first time I saw this, I was like, this looks like Buddha. I thought I was going crazy. Thank you, Grace. Thanks, because nobody mentioned it when I was researching anything. Like, okay, am I being? All right, but he is seated. He looks kind of round, which adds to the Buddha-esqueness. And also he almost looks like he has really large like earrings or earlobes like Buddha. It's not, I don't know what that's about. It might be earrings, I don't know. It looks like Buddha. And a lot of times Buddha will have his hand up like this too. This one's just that, but yeah. Anyways, this is an early example of Romanesque relief sculpture. It will slowly mature as we go into the Gothic era. And by the end of the Gothic era, it will look almost like Roman art as we head into the Renaissance. So look forward to that, I guess, if you aren't into this. If you are into this, this is Christ with a mandorla behind him. He is seated on a throne, and below him are two of the symbols of the four evangelists, and the other two are at the top. This is Michael's. We talked about him yesterday. If you're curious about the other three, it's in your book. It's just we don't talk about those, so I didn't see the point in pointing them out, because there's no imagery from those saints that we're going to look at. Of course, Christ himself is the centerpiece of the entire image, and his hand symbol and book are inscribed and mean peace unto you, which is a lovely, it's actually a really nice statement. Most of the decorations on Romanesque churches are not kind.
Yeah, they are.
They're quite terrifying. They are created to incite terror in you, which encourages money and pilgrimages. So, it's all a scheme. It's pyramid scheme, guys.
Yeah, sure. All of it. Well, this is shoot.
Now, something that I mentioned in my last class that I somehow forgot to mention in this one, all of these churches and the decorations are made of carved stone. No concrete. After the fall of Rome, concrete is forgotten. We forget about it. I don't know why, no one knows why, but it is not used again until the Renaissance. Go figure. Because of that, and the fact that all of these blocks have to be carved, these churches take a long time to build. Gothic churches, also made entirely of stone, take an equally longer time to build. They are a lot bigger. These sculptural reliefs take a long time to make, carved by hand. Most of these sculptural reliefs, they aren't carved by the same person. It's multiple people working in the same workshop that are being employed by the church to do it. So a similar style. Some of them, you'll look at one area of the church and it'll all be the same style, and then you go around the corner, it's a completely different style. That's pretty normal, just because those might have been carved at a later date or by a different workshop. So it's just a little side note. You might notice it as we go through. Now, thank you, Mossack. Mossack was on the road to Santiago de Compostela, and in Mossack was the home of the Cluniac Order of Monks, which we like them. We like them a lot. You might not know them. You will. Their founder, super messed up guy, but they themselves pretty cool. They very much supported making as much art as possible. In fact, most of them sat in their monasteries, and it was normal for them to spend all of their days and evenings making art. It's what they did on the daily. Their leader, however, very much was pro-crusades. He wanted all of the Muslims dead. He very, very much wanted them dead. So leader, screwy. Order, kind of cool. I mean, I could vibe with sitting in my room all day making art. I'd be okay with that.
Every day, all day.
Every day, all day? No. I mean, they went on like walks and prayers and ate and stuff. You could break it up. I could probably do it. I'd be okay with that.
Especially in the city where.
Yeah. especially in this setting.
Yeah.
This is Mosack, which is, of course, well, this is their cloister. This is where they lived. And you can see that as they are quite dedicated to the arts, they surround themselves with it as well. This is the central garden of the cloister. These are really cool columns. So you see that it's one column and then two and one and two. The capitol is gigantic. But the really cool thing is every single one of these capitals is different. There are different sculptural reliefs on every capitol. And the sculptural reliefs on them are all of imaginary creatures like Medusa or hippogriffs or dragons. So it's really cool to see. There's 76 capitals surrounding the cloister in total, and all of them are decorated individually. It is cool. I think it's cool. I'm going to show a close-up in a second. Your book didn't show a close-up, but I was curious. There's a close-up of one of them. This is called bestiary imagery, including images of monsters. That was quite popular during the Romanesque era. Normally, it would be used to terrify people as if they're monsters. But here they are shown in, I don't know, I think it's an aesthetically pleasing way. Not a grotesque manner as is the norm for Romanesque bestiary sculptures. Now the Cistercian monks are going to break from the Cluniac order. I know, monks. Because the Cistercians don't like the arts. They in fact want to go back to iconoclasm. You guys remember that one, right? And destroying all imagery. They want to do that. So yeah, they're going to break away and do their own thing. I wouldn't want to be with them. They support hard work. The other reason why I wouldn't want to be with them. The Cistercian monks are very much pro you earn your keep. So you would do manual labor day in, day out as a form of like meditation or worship. And later on, this is going to inspire, well, blue collar workforces in the cities to form. And then they will form guilds. And we're going to talk about guilds tomorrow. But yeah, things evolve, things change. I don't want to be a Cistercian monk, no. I don't like manual labor. But yeah. As I previously mentioned, most of the sculptural reliefs in Romanesque art are existent to terrify you. And this is an example of a church portal. We'll look at all of the different parts of a church portal in a second as it has names. But this is part of the transept of one of the church portals in Autun. This is part of the Last Judgment sculptural relief. This is the part that I found most interesting, / disturbing, / interesting. We'll look at the whole thing in a second though. Gisli Bertus, who sculpted this particular tympanum, which you'll learn what a tympanum is in a second, stated that when he sculpted this, may this terror terrify those whom earthly error binds, for the horror of these images here in this manner truly depicts what will be. I want to scare you to salvation.
I don't think it works like that.
No, I don't either, but I don't know, there's some churches today that still do that, like, scare you to God kind of deal. I've been to some as a visitor. Didn't go back. But yes, so here is one of that tympanum sculptural reliefs. Here is the weighing of the souls. I mentioned this one yesterday on that high cross. It's a pretty popular subject. Like when you die, your soul is weighed, whether it's going to make it to heaven or hell. Kind of ironic that the last time we looked at weighing of the souls was in Egypt with the Scroll of the Dead. But hey, here's another one. Now here is an angel. He is trying to, well, you can see the weight system. We'll start here first. There's a soul over here, a soul over here. The angel is trying to like lift it so that it's like light enough to go to heaven, and the devil over here is trying to pull it down so it can go into hell. These guys are having a blast over here. Then there's people, the people who have died, that are hiding behind the angels in fear of what is going to happen to them next. Over here, there's some demons squishing people into a furnace. Yeah. And up here, you have demons trying to steal people from heaven into hell. So there's a lot happening. It's pretty messed up, but it's also really interesting. Figurally, the demons do look quite monstrous and grotesque, part of that bestiary style that they were using. They meant for them to look scary. They look like emaciated creatures with large, scary mouths and talons and claws for hands and feet. They wanted them to look like monsters. Once again, they're trying to scare you. The angels, on the other hand, have lovely, linear, thin shapes. A lot of them are very S-curved, which we've talked about before, as a pleasing shape to the eye. We do still see the patterning in the folds of the garments here, that repetitive fold that kind of makes things look really flat and fake. Not that my last class grasped that. I think it looks real. That's what they said. They said this looks real. And that is when I got irritated.
Real at all.
Yeah. I asked them, I was like, does this look as real as Roman art to you? Yeah.
Look again.
It looks like cartoon figures.
It looks like cartoon figures, yeah. Yeah. They're very
movie.
flat and fake looking.
It's exaggerated.
And exaggerated, yes.
People's legs aren't that long.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
People don't have wings.
Thank you so much.
Nightmare Before
Or like
Christmas.
claws.
Yeah,
That's what it
that's
looks
what it looks like. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Nightmare Before Christmas. That's a good one. But
Don't think humans are that small.
no. Mm-mm. A little bit of hierarchic scale happening, maybe. I don't know. But yeah. Thanks, guys. I was so irritated last class. Anyways, here is the whole tympanum. The image that we were looking at is from right here. There's some more demons over there. Down on the bottom is the procession of souls walking into heaven, if you're wondering what's going on there. Some of them are cowering in fear, some of them are not as afraid. Probably because they know they're good. They went on their pilgrimage. There are also symbols with some of them that are not afraid, that are symbols marked with like going on the pilgrimage. One of them, somewhere along the line, I can't remember which one, is carrying a seashell. A seashell is what you would get for going to Santiago de Compostela. So yeah, souvenirs. And those guys that are not terrified are carrying those souvenirs. Once again, to try and encourage people to go on a pilgrimage and spend money. But yeah. Anyways, any other thoughts on this one? Another Christ with a mandalore behind him. Yeah. His arms are outstretched in kind of like a welcoming pose. Of course, the imagery around him is not as welcoming. Some of it is, some of it isn't. Depends on which section you're looking at.
It reminds me of like hieroglyphs.
Yeah.
Everything is very close together.
Yeah, I agree. It's a very muddled composition, which we looked at that with like early Christian and Byzantine art too. It was quite a muddled, busy composition. Still there. It clears up during the Gothic era. They don't add quite as much. There's still a lot, but it's a little bit clearer. Now, I told you we would learn all of the names. Everything has a name. First off is the tympanum, which you just looked at, and I already mentioned. The tympanum is the little half lunette circle above the doorway. And I'm mentioning all of this because it's going to carry over into Gothic architecture. So I am going to give you guys time to like either sketch this or write it, so you know, because we won't have time to redo it later. The voisers are the wedge-shaped blocks that make up the archivolts. The archivolts are, of course, the arches above the tympanum. The archivolts sometimes will be left bare. Sometimes they too have sculptural reliefs in them. Of course, the lintel is right below the tympanum above the doorway. The trumio is the column or post that supports the lintel, and then on each side of the doors are the jamb side posts. The jambs usually have sculptures as well. Yeah, I'll give you guys time, don't worry. Don't rush it. This is a shorter chapter, so we can slow down a little bit on this one. Yeah, I saw you sketching it out. That's what I would have done too. I need to.
I can't learn.
The vocab part didn't help me.
No, I have to look at it.
I needed to know where it was.
Like,
Yeah. Of course, with Romanesque, these doorways or portals, as they're more commonly called or referred to, they're a lot more simplistic than the Gothic portals. Gothic portals are going to become a lot larger, more recessed, and pointed, of course. Because they are further back into the narthex, it allows for more archivolts, which means more sculptures. I do have an appreciation for someone that goes to architecture school now. They have to learn all this vocabulary and do math. Nope. Maybe that's why I don't like my math class as much. Most of them on their little intro questions said their favorite subject was math. Yeah, that's weird. Almost all of them said it. You guys like math?
Depends on the type.
Yeah.
It depends on the person.
I was good at it, but I didn't like
I'm
it.
good at it. Yeah.
I can't understand, like, when someone asks you what your favorite subject is and you answer with math, like, what are you taking? It makes your life so miserable that your favorite subject is math.
I like accounting and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Like,
I like accounting and statistics. Those are fun.
pre-calc, algebra.
No.
Oh, thank you. My favorite history.
One of them answered that their favorite subject was calculus and trigonometry.
I'm sorry.
You are not my people. So maybe that's why I'm just not meshing with that. Like, I don't know what's going on in your head. You need to get out more.
Like stability and math is that?
Yeah, I feel like sometimes if like English is not your first subject, I would understand why math, you might enjoy it because it's the same no matter what. But still, man. So I mentioned yesterday that illuminated manuscripts are going to continue on for a long time. They're going to continue until the printing press is invented. So Renaissance. So we're going to be seeing a lot more illuminated manuscripts today and tomorrow. I did not pull all of them because it got a bit redundant and repetitive. And I just pulled a few that I liked the most. So there are more in your book if you're interested, if you like illuminated manuscripts. Some of them are really cool. Some of them are, I don't know, they're all pretty interesting. The ones that are in your book, it's just we didn't have time to go over all of them. And like I said, they were all pretty much the same. The Cluniac order not only made sculptures, they also spent a lot of time making these illuminated manuscripts and paintings. Oh, if you ever Google like their monastery, there's a bunch of paintings that they had in their individual apartments. Yeah, they would just chill in their apartment and paint the walls. See, those are my people.
I would love to do that. Like, I
Yeah.
wouldn't even mind having to paint it back when it is out, but.
Yep.
Nice.
So here is yet another page for the Matthew Gospels. We looked at like 4 of them yesterday. Here's another one. This one has obviously a really large L, which stands for liver or book, and of course Matthew himself over here. So the book of Matthew. It's quite literal here. Book Matthew. Book Matthew. Of course, what are some of the things you guys notice here?
There's a lot of the
Zoomorphic and like organic shapes over in the L. Yeah, there's a lot of that patterning going on. What else?
vibrant colors.
Very vibrant colors.
Still flat.
It's still flat.
I would think this is a better description of the saint.
I like it.
I think
Yeah.
it's a better.
He is standing
Aesthetically.
underneath a church in
Yeah.
a portal. He has a halo behind him, so you can definitely tell it's a saint versus the ones we looked at yesterday that have halos. Yeah, thank you, Jess. I think one of them did have a halo, actually. I'm lying. But yeah, over here in the L, thank you. We have a lot of zoomorphic shapes like dogs and the birds. Over here's another bird in between 2 birds. There's also humans. I really like the stork who has his neck kind of wrapped around in that organic plant-like form that we saw yesterday down at the bottom here. So we're still seeing in illuminated manuscripts a very similar trend from yesterday. But the saint does look more like a saint. I would agree with Brandon. Some more. I like this one. I thought this one was cool. There were others that were in your book that I think your book spent more time on those, but I thought this one was interesting because it's not a like saint. It's a knight and his squire battling 2 dragons. Well, 1 dragon here. And all of them come together to make the letter R, which is kind of interesting. Yeah. So in 1134, the Cistercian order of monks did manage to ban full page illuminations, so full pages of just drawings. This, however, so this would not be allowed. This also technically would not have been allowed, but it was done right before that ban happened. So we will see a bit of a break in between until that ban is lifted later on of illuminating manuscripts. Like I said, there are dragons. Here's one of the dragons here who comes around to make the top part of the R. The bottom dragon here makes the middle and bottom section of the R. The knight is standing on top of his squire. He's in a very slender, I would say, feminine pose. The knight is. That's just me. Your book didn't mention that. I think he looks feminine though. And he is slaying the dragon who has his mouth snarled up right here.
That's all right. Anything?
That's his like squire servant.
So, yeah.
Yeah. He's got a
I think
lance and he's impaled the bottom dragon, and the other one is about to cut off his head.
The feminine, like you said.
Yeah, I think he looks
No,
feminine.
it's because he didn't have to do anything. And he's
Yeah.
stepping on a servant.
Well, he's still killing the dragon, but yeah.
You know?
A lot of people today, well, I mean, a lot of people, I thought he was St. George when I saw him because St. George is known for slaying dragons. Your book didn't mention it, so I don't know for sure. But that's who I thought it was with my limited knowledge of saints. But St. George is normally depicted with a dragon. That's kind of the thing. That's what he's known for. Yeah.
Very
What a
good.
guy.
Dragons, not literal dragons, but dragons representative of evil. So right here, this knight and squire are slaying the evil forces, so sin. I know dragons. We're going to see tomorrow someone that did unicorns in their art. So yeah, dragons and unicorns, yay. I think it's kind of cool. It's different from Christian art. It's still Christian art as it is a Christian text, but it's not overtly Christian. which I appreciate. It is interesting to me. Of course, you'll notice the frames become quite commonplace in illuminated manuscripts. We saw them yesterday too. We're going to keep seeing them. My professor's favorite thing in the world. This reliquary statue. This is the reliquary statue of Saint Foy or Saint Faith. She was a child martyr. She died when she was very, very young, a small child, as she refused to pray to the pagan gods. Yeah. And inside of this is slightly morbid. So inside of this reliquary is her skull. Yeah. Which is why the head's a little big. Got her skull inside. Yeah. Yay. As I stated earlier, most people believed that these relic items had the power to heal you and absolve your sin if you got close enough to them. You weren't allowed to touch them, they would be protected. But yeah, you could get close to them. And a lot of these churches would really extravagantly adorn these reliquary items. The more ostentatious they were, the more attention they drew. So here we have the statue of Saint Foy, which is gold and silver gilt. So we have a layer of silver with gold that has been melted over top. It is covered in precious jewels, not stones, jewels. And cameos with a wooden core inside to hold it up. And it is 2 feet tall. It's expensive.
Yeah.
Now, the original skull of Saint Foy did not belong in Conques, France, but it was stolen. There was a monk that said in his dream that Saint Foy came to him and said she wanted to be in Conques. I'm not joking, this is recorded in history. So he went to the monastery that she was housed in, stole her and took her to Conques, and everyone was like, oh, okay, the saint told you she wanted to be there. Yeah. Okay, that works.
Legit?
It's legit, yeah.
Yeah.
That's not the norm. But yeah, this one's a fun one that has a fun story. It wasn't really talked about too much in your book, but I thought I'd mention it. She is, of course, sitting on a throne of gold as well. She would have held a scepter in one hand and something else in the other one, I can't remember, but like symbols of sainthood and royalty and God. Yes. Mm-hmm.
No wonder your professor liked it.
Yeah, she saw this one in person and she really liked it.
Oh, that's beautiful.
I'm sure it's amazing.
The picture really.
There is a reliquary that I have seen in person, and we'll talk about that one tomorrow. It's also gold. But we're talking 6 feet by 6 feet gold.
I mean, I saw it.
Yeah, see, you saw
it. Was like,
it's impressive to see that much gold in one spot.
Like a little piece of gold is so heavy, so you just
yeah. It's really the one that I'm thinking of, it was in Cologne Cathedral. I told you yesterday, I didn't go to Cologne to see this stuff, but I noticed that because it's a giant piece of gold. You notice them, you pay attention to them, it draws your attention, and I mean, it serves its purpose, which was to attract tourists. Mm-hmm. Even today, tourists still go to Conques to see this, even though pilgrimages aren't a thing anymore. So yeah, now we're moving from Spain and France to the Holy Roman Empire, or HRE is probably what I'll call it from now on, because that's what it's more commonly known as. Plus it gets tiring to type out Holy Roman Empire over and over and over again. After the Ottonian or the Otto dynasty with Henry, Henry, we talked about him yesterday, Henry II dies, the Franks take over. The area is known as Francia for a long time. Later on, that will become like France and Germany and Italy. Yeah, that region. But we are focusing mostly on Germany in this section. We'll have a French section all to its own in a moment. Similarly to France and Spain, they also need to start adding larger churches as their original churches were not big enough for the pilgrimages to, well, go to. They also start incorporating stone ceilings. The churches that we looked at yesterday, if you remember, they had wooden roofs. They, however, decide to not use barrel vaults, but to go for groin vaults. Groin vaults are slightly more stable and also create a little bit of a more interesting architectural aspect. Groin vaults, as they are more stable, allow for things like a clear story to be added to these buildings. If you remember, the last clear story we looked at was in a wooden roofed church. Stone roofed churches are a little too heavy for them. But groin vaults fix that. Now, this I don't have an image of, so I am going to draw it where I know I don't, because I did it for another section, not this one. Barrel vaults, round. Groin vaults take this, but they add another round aspects to it. So you have two arches overlapping each other. Later on, the Gothic architects are going to start using pointed arches for their groin vaults, which make them even more stable, as pointed arches are more stable than round arches in terms of anything. So this ceiling has the groin vaults incorporated rather than a barrel vault, which has, well, arches, round arches, two round arches intersecting to make it up. And of course, you see they also added arches in between for aesthetic purposes. This one also has engaged columns, and of course, your clear story on top. This one does not have a gallery. I don't know if anyone's still on that one. And that takes us into Milan. In Milan, this is a rare example of a church that still has an atrium. This was not normal, but I thought I'd include it just to show that there are still churches that are doing these atriums. Atriums are this empty courtyard area in front. Originally, those were installed in churches for you to cleanse yourself before you entered into the church. This atrium is purely for decoration. But you see, this is a very much basilica plan format church. There's no transept. It does have towers. Towers will be quite normal later on in churches. This is just an early example of a church with a tower. And of course, an octagonal dome in the back, similar to the Carolinian church that we looked at yesterday. It also had an octagonal dome. This is the first example of a ribbed groin vault in art history. I just mentioned like 30 seconds ago, the Gothics start incorporating ribbed vaults as the norm, as it allows you to get much taller in your architecture. And this is an early example of a ribbed vault. This ribbed vault is still trying to use that round arch, but you can see here they've incorporated that ribbing in between the section to kind of bolster everything up. The true ribbed arch will have a more straight line, a more literal point to it versus this one. This is once again an early example. Although I say early, it's only going to take them like 200 years to figure it out. Maybe that's a long time. I don't know. Longer than I'm alive, so. Yeah. Some more illuminated manuscripts, but this one is Hildegard of Bingen. The other thing that my art history professor really liked. Hildegard. This one also has a fun story. Hildegard thought that she was a prophet. God came down and spoke to her on a regular basis and told her the future. Yeah. So here we have an image of Hildegard, who was a nun, and God, as she described in her visions, came down to her with tongue like fire That's what that is. And just inserted his voice in her head. And she thought for a long time that she was cuckoo. She might have been. But eventually she confessed to her bishop, who is this guy right here. And he told her she needed to write down the visions as they were God's word. Later on, Hildegard is going to be employed by a lot of rich people, including the king of the Holy Roman Empire, who wanted to know their futures. Yep. Her book of prophecies is called the Scivias. In case you're interested, you can read it. Yeah, it's like a Notre Dame kind of thing, just the female version, which is kind of cool. She did garner a lot of respect in her time, which was rare for females. So I think that's why my art history professor probably liked her. She was also very supportive of the arts. She was one of those people that went and painted her room and decorated it, and she did design all of these illuminated pages. She didn't paint them, but she said how she wanted them to look. Which of course is an interior and exterior at the same time. Also very flat. Yeah. But here you see a reference to Byzantine mosaics with the gold in the background. Oh, the Scivias.
Yeah, there's no purple.
No, there's no purple. It's brown. It looks kind of purpley.
Yeah.
It's brown. It's the normal
like
traditional clothes that they wore in the monastery. And something that's not an illuminated manuscript, I decided to include this one too because I thought it was kind of interesting. This was a baptismal font, so where babies were baptized. We looked at one that was stolen from Islam and taken to France. When we're going over Islamic art, this one is just another example of a baptismal font, but from a different time period and different culture. It is supposed to represent the molten sea on which 12 oxen were made from Solomon's temple. So supposedly in Solomon's temple, he had like bronze statues of 12 oxes. The 12 oxes represent the 12 apostles. So this basin sits on top of those bronze oxes. And of course, on the basin, you have an image of Christ being baptized himself by John the Baptist. Now, the interesting thing here is that Christ is shown, well, you can only see his top half, but he's naked. This is the first example ever in religious imagery of them showing nudity. It was not okay. But this was considered acceptable as it was a baptismal font and it shows Christ's baptism. It kind of makes sense that he would not have clothes on. Oh yeah, there's also images of people in 3/4 view over on this side. So you can see like their side, their front, and their other side, like almost their entire body. It's been a while since we've seen that too. So it's kind of cool. We're getting there, guys. We're slowly but surely we're getting back to where we started with Greek art. And this is in another Notre Dame in case you want to see it in Belgium. I told you there's a bunch of Notre Dames. The Notre Dame of the Fountain. And yet another reliquary item. This is the reliquary of Saint Alexander. We'll see more relics tomorrow too. I thought this one was really interesting because they did fashion the head in the same style that they would fashion portrait busts of the Roman emperors. Obviously not as well done as theirs. But of course, this is a different medium. then that was as well. This is done in the repoussé technique, so it would have been beaten from behind rather than sculpted or chiseled like the marble statues that we looked at before. So a bit of a different technique, a bit of a different medium and tools used. Also a different time period. They didn't do things as natural, but it has that same vibe to it as the portrait bust did. It is, of course, sitting on top of a pedestal. On the pedestal, in case you're interested, are obviously, well, St. Alexander with the Pope on one side and Theolodius on the other. I don't know who St. Theolodius is, sorry. Like I mentioned earlier, I have a very limited knowledge of saints. There's a lot of them.
Yeah.
And I know some of the main ones, but not all of them. But yeah, St. Alexander does have a kind of interesting story. He supposedly had his head chopped off and got up out of his grave and carried his head into the church. So it's kind of a fitting reliquary. It doesn't house his head, but that's why it's in the shape of a head. It fits him and his story, which was normal for saints too. Usually they'd have some sort of a symbol or object that identifies them. Like I mentioned earlier, St. George is usually with a dragon, so that we know it's them. Because once again, people are illiterate. So even though there's names down here, it doesn't mean people can read it. Oh, the model for his head, by the way, was taken from another Byzantine sculpture too, in case you're interested. We haven't looked at that sculpture, but it's taken straight from it. And let's take us into Italy. Italy is a bit different than everyone else as far as Romanesque. Quite a bit different from everyone else as far as Romanesque, as they still incorporate a lot of Greek and Roman architecture, like a lot more than Romanesque does. Romanesque was a bit plainer than Italian Romanesque is. Italian Romanesque also has a little bit of Gothic hints to it as well. So they also have a different structure to their churches. Most of the others, everything was an all-in-one inclusive kind of thing. They would have the baptismal font inside of the church, whereas in Italy, it was normal to have a separate building for that to take place, as they considered it to be a very important moment and sacred. Then behind the baptismal here at Pisa, you have the actual church itself, a traditional basilica plan. And then behind that is the campanile, or the bell tower. That's a bell tower, guys. It is the Leaning Tower of Pisa, but it's a bell tower. Now, all of these were done over a long period of time. The time period is on the next slide. I tried to get all of the info on this one, and then, well, dates and stuff on the next one. But they are freestanding. They are completely individual buildings. The basilica format church does have a timber roof, which is how it was able to get to this many stories. It has a wooden roof, not a stone one. But you can see here they've used a lot of Roman arches, just echoed in over and over and over, very reminiscent of like the Colosseum style was. So really sticking to their roots. But I mean, it's the Romanesque style, and we're in Italy. So it should be a little bit nicer than the others, in my opinion. I mean, they got the original to refer to. They're not looking at books. So all of these buildings are covered in classical elements. They are really big, yeah. Here is your dates in case you're curious. The cathedral itself, which is what we're looking at in the front right now, was started first in 1063. Then the baptistry, which is this building that's in front here, was in 1153, and the bell tower was 1174. The bell tower was already crooked when it started. So the campanile began leaning while it was still being made. That was because of, well, settling foundation. It is slowly but surely leaning more and more and more. In 1999, this is just a fun random fact, they tried to take out soil from the like not leaning side and level it out a little bit, and they managed to do it to where it'll be stable for at least 300 more years, and then they'll have to go again. So yeah, it's just fun little facts. It's a very large complex, but also really impressive. I haven't been. Has anyone been? I want to go there. I had a friend that after we went to Venice, she went on like her own grand tour to Rome and Pisa and then Greece and then back to London. She had a lot of money though, so makes a difference. Yeah, I want to go to Barcelona. I had a friend that went to Barcelona, and she said it was really nice, but she didn't go for art because she doesn't care about art. She went for food. Yeah, I mean, I care about food too, but I want to see the other stuff too. I don't want to go on a trip and just eat. I don't understand people who do that. Now, something else that is located in Italy is the San Giovanni Baptistery, another example of a church in Italy that had a separate church and baptistry. Once again, just hitting home the fact that they really considered baptisms important moments in someone's life. Both of these baptistries, the front doors to them do face the cathedral, so you'd walk from one to the other directly. And funny enough, the front door of this baptistry, it's kind of weird. If you go all the way from Modena to the Parthenon, they will meet. It's crazy. Also, another one that takes direct relation from classical style and Christian architectural plans is, of course, references the central format Christian church like San Vitale that we started off looking at in Byzantium, but it also kind of references the Parthenon a bit with its front porch entryway and arches. Of course, they added Christian motifs. These doors are going to be really important later. And by later, I don't mean in this class. I mean, if you take Survey 2, you're going to learn about these doors. Yesterday, we talked about doors. There's actually two more really important doors that are going to pop up in art history if we take Survey 2. And I know that because my art history instructor made us write essays about comparing and contrasting all three of those doors. There's three of them. Yep. Now, they also had sculptures in Italy. The sculptures were quite a bit different than in Northern Europe, though you can probably already tell just from looking at it. They're much more of the Roman style, just like the architecture itself is. It's much more Roman. For everything being lumped under the umbrella of Romanesque, one of them is more Roman than the others, and that's the Italian one. So here is Benedetto's King David statue, which is in a niche. He is attached. He is not freestanding. He looks very freestanding, but he's not. He is still attached. There's not any contrapposto, but he is kind of swaying a little bit. Contrapposto, of course, is when you have one hip sticking out, and yeah. He does kind of have a more natural feel to him, though, than the other sculptures that we've looked at from this era. And he looks like he doesn't want to be in a niche, like he's trying to get out. He's trying not to be attached. He's trying to be a freestanding sculpture, but he's not quite there. That takes us into what's happening in the Romanesque style in Normandy and England. Now, first off, before we start, the tops of these towers were done in the Gothic era. So we're not going to look at the top. We're going to look at the bottom section. You can tell even like looking at the colors, the top is like a dark soot color and then the bottom is not. We're looking at the lighter section. It was pretty common for them to go back during the Gothic era and like add stuff because Gothic architecture was extremely popular and people liked it more than the Romanesque style, which I understand. I totally get it. But in England and Normandy, this is obviously not as Romanesque as the Romanesque. It's borderline Gothic, borderline. But Romanesque hits England and Normandy around when Gothic art is starting. So it kind of makes sense that it's a more of a fusion architecture, but like I said, the tops of these were done later, so don't look at that top part. But we do have longer, taller lines, which is a characteristic of Gothic art. The linearness, vertical, is key for Gothic art. It's not quite as squat as far as decorations here. We also have 3 portions. That 3-portion theme is going to be pretty common in Gothic art. So we have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's sets of 3 for everything. That's normal. I know. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. We're going to look at a bunch of Gothic churches, and like towards the very, very end of the Gothic style, they go to 5. But yeah, 3. 3 is where we're starting tomorrow. Yeah. Another example of Romanesque architecture. This one's from Durham, England. I loved this one. Well, this is another one that your book didn't really talk about too much, but I love that they decided to like decorate the piers instead of leaving them plain with these chevron patterns, and they have different patterns on each set. So this one back here is more of a geometric pentagon style.
So like, there's a lot of columns in there.
There's a lot of columns, yes, but they're all different. They're unique.
Very long.
The large ones are piers.
The piers I'll hold up.
Yeah, the piers carry most of the weight. The smaller, thinner ones are the columns. The piers that we've been looking at so far, they're square. This one uses round piers, and they decided to decorate them, which I think adds to the structural elements of things. And yeah, so that's why I included this one, was because I liked the piers. It is more aesthetically pleasing. England, you'll notice tomorrow, they take what everyone else is doing, but they put their own twist on it by doing stuff like this, which I appreciate. Now, some of these windows and things, that was done later during the Gothic era. We'll talk about that later too. Yeah. Now, before we actually get into tomorrow, I do want to go over some of the features, as the exterior of this actually has something called quadrant arches. Quadrant arches are these little guys up here. They're like a half of an arch. That's the name quadrant. This will evolve into something called a flying buttress tomorrow. Flying buttresses are quintessential to Gothic era architecture, as it allows for a lot more height. But this is the early baby version. We're going to be seeing a lot of cutaways tomorrow too. But yeah, this is the interior of Durham. So we have the nave, one of those decorated piers, a side aisle. It does have springing to hold up the arches. So the springing is that it comes to an arch, and there's like a mini arch underneath it, kind of also helping to support things. And then on the exterior, it does have the little quadrant arch as well. A little bit more illuminated manuscripts before we go today. We have the Bury Bible, which is by Master Hugo. Master Hugo was not a monk, which is why I included this one. Every single one of the illuminated manuscripts we've looked at thus far in this class were from monks. During the Romanesque era, you see the emergence of artisans who make these illuminated manuscripts for a living, for money. Monks are not making these for money. They are making, well, the church is selling them for money, but the monks are making them for pious reflection. These guys, like Master Hugo, are making it to make money. This is their livelihood. This does show two scenes from Deuteronomy, which talks about the other reasons why I chose this one. They're both of Moses. So a long time ago, this is not in your book either. This is just something that I happen to know for whatever reason. I don't know why I know this, but a long time ago, in original translations from Hebrew to, well, Latin, they thought that Moses had horns. And that is what the translation came out as. What it actually is like God's light shining on him. But a lot of early sculptures and images of Moses have him with horns. It's just fun.
It's just like,
It's fun. Here is Moses coming down from Mount Sinai with the laws, and he's teaching them to everyone. And over here is Moses pointing out the edible and non-edible animals to people. Well, the clean and unclean beasts. Huh?
I've never seen them with one.
I have a lot,
Oh,
but
really?
I've looked at a lot of old stuff. There's a statue of him that I don't think we go over in this class, but he's got two horns coming out of his head. It looks weird, but I like it. And that's what made me curious and why I wanted to know. Yeah, it was a long time ago. I was probably like 20 then. Yeah, these translations, guys, they happen. I believe this might be the last one. Oh, no, I'd rather focus on this one as the last one. Sorry, this one's a lot more important. This one's cool. I agree, it's cool. I like all of the color usage. But this one's more important. This is the Bayeux Tapestry, and this is where we're going to end. It's very similar to Trajan's Column in its continuous frieze, as it tells the story of, well, conquering. So it begins with the death of Edward the Confessor in England, and it ends with, well, someone else taking over. It is 230 feet long. It's called a tapestry. It's not a tapestry. It's actually just a really embroidered piece of linen. But yeah, we're gonna watch a video now. Huge. And it's a narrative frieze. And it really does go in chronological, and it details. It was originally done for a church. It was meant to be hung in a church. However, later on, they deemed that conquest was maybe not an appropriate theme for church.
What?
Where's it at? It's in the details. I don't remember which. Everything is. So the story goes, Edward the Confessor left the throne of England to William the Conqueror, but Harold took it before William could get there. William's in Germany. because he kind of rules that too. But it ends up causing, which is exactly what this tapestry illustrates. You can even see the boats going across the English Channel here. Everything is detailed, all of it. They even have details of them setting up their camp outside of the walls. So it's quite impressive, and it's our last bit of Romanesque art that we're going to look at. This is Romanesque solely in the fact that it was made during that time period. There's nothing that really identifies it as Romanesque. It doesn't really fit in anything else. So in summary, though the Romanesque era was, well, really happening in different parts of England simultaneously, it can be linked together through architecture. Romanesque itself is mostly deemed an architectural art movement. Of course, there are also illuminated manuscripts and reliquary items that become very popular during that region as well, due to, well, things that are happening with people and culture. So how would you best describe Romanesque architecture?
Evolution. I mean, it's like they're learning how to produce.
They're learning how to produce big churches. Yeah, this is an evolutionary process. That is the perfect way to sum it up. And of course, it has a lot of Roman motifs to it, which is why it's called Romanesque. And other arts produced like illuminated manuscripts and reliquary items. What do you guys think about those? Like them, dislike them? Do they serve a purpose? Manuscripts, relics.
I mean,
To the people back then, they served a purpose, because if they were illiterate, they can't read
Yeah.
images to depict the story.
Mhm.
Their main takeaway.
Very
the
good.
tapestry.
Yeah.
That thing.
That tapestry
That-
is literally it's a narrative story for people that can't read. And like I said, it was originally put into a church, and therefore everyone that went in could read this, well, read the
Read.
story of William the Conqueror taking over England. So they do serve their purpose and their function well, I think. They're very ostentatious though, very
Yeah.
costly. But, yeah. Tomorrow we're going to pick back up with Gothic art, which is really a continuation of what we talked about today. As Brandon stated, it's an evolutionary process, and this is where that evolution culminates.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. Gothic art. More churches, more illuminated manuscripts, more relics. Yay.
That would be that. It's like